I just had a huge crash. Oh, my bike's up there. Oh, fuck. Ah. Ah. Yeah. Fell off. Simple. Oh. My handlebar just clipped a rock and I fell down. This, oh, hit my helmet really hard. I'm gonna get up here and take stock. Yeah. Easy trail, flying, having fun. And bumped my bar here and shot me down there.
Rebecca Rusch is a 7-time world champion endurance and adventure athlete who has spent more than 30 years chasing firsts, capturing podiums, PRs, and championship titles, as well as accomplishing groundbreaking, never-before-imagined adventures like her 1,200-mile ride on the Ho Chi Minh Trail in search of the crash site that claimed her father's life in the Vietnam War. On November 11th of 2021, Rebecca was out on a solo, multi-day mountain bike adventure along the Coconino Trail in Arizona, when on the afternoon of day 3, she clipped her handlebar at speed on a protruding rock and was launched from her bike into a ravine 10 feet below, bouncing multiple times on the ground, breaking her helmet and badly bruising her ribs. Her ribs healed. Her brain? Well, that's why we're here. 2.5 years after she hit the ground and suffered a concussion, Rebecca is still not okay. And she wants to share her story and help others from the same fate. I'm Celine Yeager, podcaster, health journalist, and longtime friend and past teammate of Rebecca's. And through this 4-part podcast series, we're going to take you through Rebecca's journey, including the treatments she sought and conversations with leading edge experts about how they're treating and thinking about concussion today. Today, we focus on the crash and what Rebecca did in the immediate aftermath, namely, try to rest her brain as much as possible to let it heal. This is Brainstorm, and this is her story. All right, Rebecca, here we are after years, honestly, I think at this point of planning this series on concussion. And, I just want to start by asking, how are you today?
Uh, um, I'm grateful to be alive, to be honest with you. I'm grateful to be here because this has been really hard. It's been probably one of the hardest things I've done in my life, and I've done a lot of really hard things. Um, so I'm grateful, but I'm also really exhausted because it's been a super long journey. And where I am now, since the crash, you know, I still have symptoms. I don't have as many symptoms or as frequent, but it's been multiple years of headaches, lethargy, lack of motivation, depression, anxiety, poor sleep, so many things that I had no idea I was in for. And so now, multiple years later, my sleep is better, my mobility is better, joint stiffness has gone away. The daily headaches have gone away. I still have some really, really severe sort of positional headaches that can be activated. I'm still not as motivated as I am used to being. Multitasking is a challenge. I still get some eye fatigue. But the difference is now is I know the triggers and I have tools to actually address them. So overload of work and lack of movement is a totally toxic combination for me. So if I'm on the computer all day, I'm super stressed, I have a lot going on, that's going to elicit headaches for me. That's going to elicit me being lack of patience and intolerant with people, and anger can come out.
Like you did cancel our first recording because you said like your headaches were just overwhelming. Like you had just mentioned that you that can trigger something
Yeah,
can trigger those again.
I had a really devastating headache one time we were supposed to record, and I almost called the emergency room. I was brought to my knees. It was that bad of a headache. And it was different than the ongoing headaches I had early on that were daily, but way more intense. And I'm learning that that's actually a positional thing.
Mm,
The headaches were one of my fears of getting back to exercising, was that I was going to elicit these horrible symptoms. And I now know that heart rate and exercise doesn't elicit headaches for me. It actually helps.
gotcha.
But certain positional things, certain types of stress, too much computer time, that
Mm,
is what is eliciting headaches. And so where I am now, yeah, I'm still not recovered. I'm still not normal or quote unquote myself, or which is what a lot of people talk about when they talk about brain injury recovery, is like, I want to get back to who I was. Um, I don't really love that definition, because what does that mean? But I'm not back to the place where I was prior to the crash. The difference now is the frequency, the intensity of the symptoms, and my ability to know that I have some tools to actually, when I feel symptoms coming on or to prevent them, I have some tools to actually deal with it, whether it's yoga or meditation or going on a run or shutting the computer or taking a nap. So I have these tools, but I'm still in it. I still have an injury.
yeah.
I'm still recovering. I'm going to put it that way, but much more improved, and I'm more educated on what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a couple questions before I want to hit us in the Wayback Machine at this point. Um, so you had mentioned mobility and joint issues. Is that concerning your neck or your back? Like I know that this was a full body, carcassing of yourself into a ditch. Like what mobility were you referring to there that is better?
Yeah, I had a pretty severe neck injury that I didn't really discover until till partway through, which makes a lot of sense. So yeah, there's definitely some really big neck stiffness and stuff like that. Some of the other joint stiffness was like knees and elbows and flexibility, and quite honestly, that's because I stopped moving.
Uh,
And it's because it was sort of this cascading effect of me not really doing the right recovery things. And so some of the symptoms I felt, like joint stiffness and overall body stiffness and back pain, I brought it on myself because I stopped moving.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, some of the symptoms were from the injury and some of them were from my the recovery process that I didn't really navigate that well.
So, you're pushing almost 3 years at this point,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering how the people around you, do they understand? I mean, one of the things that always stands out to me, and the reason I think that this kind of a series is important, is that concussion and any brain trauma is called an invisible injury, right? Like if you had to use a wheelchair, it would be a blatantly obvious. It's something that you were still healing. Or if you had any kind of other apparatus that was facilitating your movement, but you don't. People can see you out on your bike, people can see you doing videos, and they, I'm curious like how this is gelling with the people around you.
Well, I mean, it is called an invisible injury for a couple reasons. And one, you physically can't see what's going on. People around you can't see it, like you said, but also you can't see it and you don't understand it. And there's a third aspect, which is me, is many people, including me, we hide the injury because we don't think, one, we don't think there's something wrong. Two, we're ashamed. Three, we don't understand it. We don't know what to do. Four, we think we can handle it on our own. And like, I got this. I just need to tough through this. And it's I've had this I had this injury for really, this is the first time I've talked publicly about it. People around me know what's going on, but I hid it for fear of losing my job, for fear of being seen as weak, for thinking, oh, it's all in my head. There's really nothing wrong with me. Yeah, it is in my head, but not in a made up way that there's this stigma sometimes around brain injuries. And so yeah, I hid it. And the moment I stopped hiding it from people close to me was the moment my recovery really started to take a turn. And so what I know now is communication to people around me is really important. Removing distraction in my life is really important. Writing things down for me to keep track of them is really important. And me even maybe telling my husband, I forgot that we talked about that. And not being ashamed to say, I'm sorry, I don't remember that we talked about that. And that's really hard to admit that kind of vulnerability that I need to write this down so that I can remember. And you and I have even had some of those interactions where I've messed up the times that we were supposed to record. And I've had to just say to my friends and those close to me and my coworkers and to the wider universe that, hey, can we go over that again? I don't remember. Or I need to take a break. I'm not feeling good right now. That has been a big change for me to admit that kind of vulnerability and to say to the people around me, hey, I could use some help with this. It's hard, but it's really, really important because it is an invisible injury. And the only way you heal it is by making it less invisible. And that's by talking about it and just putting yourself out there and saying, I'm hurt. So if people can't see it, it's up to the person who's hurt to tell them. And it's also up to the people around close to them. This is close to you to say, hey, what can I help with? Or how are you doing? Or can we go for a walk?
Yeah.
So it to make it less invisible, it really takes both parties. It takes the individual and the people around them to just acknowledge, hey, you fell and hit your head.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. So I am so grateful that we're actually doing this because it's really important for me that my really arduous journey, my long, sad, frustrating recovery can maybe be a lesson to help other people elevate and quicken their recovery and get back at it sooner than I have.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's hard, and I respect that. So speaking of hard, I do think that we need to go back to the site. We're sharing some of the video clips in the series and all of that, but take us back to that day. Like, I wasn't really sure if you were trying to set an FKT or if this was just a scouting thing. Like, what were you doing on the day and what happened?
I was in Arizona doing a 4 day self-supported bike packing ride. And I was out there doing it for fun. I love to go ride my bike by myself in a beautiful place. It's still cold back home. And yeah, I went to the desert to go have a really fun solo adventure. I wasn't trying to race, wasn't trying to set any record. I really just basically wanted to go camping on my bike and do a really cool route that I had looked at before. So I was out on an adventure and
Where was it? The Coconino Trail?
it's called the Coconino Trail. It's around Sedona, Arizona, and really fun mountain bike trail, really cool route that I'd had my eye on for a while.
Cool. And
And so, yeah, November 11th, it was actually Veterans Day. It was afternoon, warm, sunny afternoon. I was having so much fun on my bike. It was easy section of trail. I was actually singing, listening to music, singing. Um, in my total happy place. And in the blink of an eye, I clipped my right handlebar on a rock that was sort of extending out into the trail. And it sent me flying. And my bike stopped immediately. My body got torpedoed and jettisoned down this 10-foot rocky embankment. And I was fully aware. It happened super fast, but I remember clipping my bar, flying through the air. And the first impact I felt was on the left side of my head, right on my helmet, on a rock. So it was a hard impact on the left side of my head. The next bounce was on the right side ribs in the back. I rolled a few times and then everything stopped. And I laid there in the bottom of this cliff and I opened my eyes and was like, okay, I'm alive. I looked up and could see my bike was 10 feet up this rocky cliff. It hadn't
That's
fallen
crazy
down
that
with
your bike
me.
stayed there.
It just stayed there. Um, and I took a breath. I looked up at the sky and then I rolled onto my hands and knees and was like, okay, I can move.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I was so aware. It happened really fast, but I was so aware even of the numbers of bounces, the rolling, where I was. And so I took a deep breath and it was kind of weird. I had been kind of filming on this trail just to like show people the route and and that. And instantly I turned my camera back on even before I got up off the ground, which was really strange. And you know, I think it was sort of I wanted companionship. I wanted like someone to talk to. You know, I was alone, fully self-supported, out of cell phone range, definitely there by myself. You know, no one's coming to get me. And so I turned the camera on and I started talking to it and then was just like, I'm okay. Okay, I can breathe. You know, and I went into EMT mode. I'm a first responder. And so I kind of did a self-assessment. I was like, okay, ribs, ouch. Okay, I'm breathing, airway breathing, circulation. My hands weren't tingly or anything like that. So I crawled back up to my bike. And then typical cyclist, I check my bike next. It was like, okay, but it's also my escape out of there. You know,
Yeah.
it's 15 miles probably from the next trailhead and with no cell phone coverage, no one's coming in there and it's late afternoon. So I check my bike's okay. I take off my helmet and I see the impact, which was a super sharp pinpoint rock, you know, break into my helmet right on the crash coordinates, the map coordinates of the crash coordinates of where my dad died in the Vietnam War, in the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. I had those painted on my helmet. And the rock hit right on that point. I look at my helmet, I put it back on. And at this point, I'm in self rescue mode. And so I take a selfie of myself actually to look at my pupils and assess myself. And it was kind of weird. I was like assessing myself as a patient, um, which is great. I had that kind of training and I was like, okay, where am I? How am I? How am I to get out of here? I basically went through my checklist. As I'm looking at my helmet, I'm seeing the break. A plane flies overhead. Which my dad was a pilot, and in the Vietnam War, he didn't come home that day. And I just felt this feeling of like the crash coordinate, the plane, like, okay, my dad's looking out for me. Put my helmet on, rescue yourself, Rebecca. And I actually, so looked at my pupils dilated, like, okay, my bike's okay. I got to start moving. I had a satellite communication device, so I sent a message to a friend, meet me at this trailhead. I'm good. I'm a few hours out. Please meet me there. And so I really went through like the ways to save myself. So got back on my bike, started moving. I couldn't really breathe deep because there's pain in my ribs. And I knew time was ticking externally and internally because it's now late afternoon, it's dusk, and I was like, okay. And then internally, you know, I know if you have broken ribs, you can possibly have a punctured lung. If you hit your head that hard, you can possibly have a brain bleed. And
Mm.
so those two things are like, the clock is ticking. I need to get out of here because if any of those things are happening, I need to get to a place where an ambulance can come help me. And so I'm talking to the camera. I actually started talking to myself in the third person, like, Rebecca, you know, okay, you keep breathing, keep moving, stay calm. You're going to be okay. And I'm talking to myself in this way. And, you know, when we review the footage now, like you've looked at it, my mood is crazy. I'm like
It's swinging. You're
laughing.
like laughing, then you're crying. Like, and if you, that was my first thought when I saw the picture that you took, is like, it looked like if it was a cartoon, there would be birds and stars swirling around your head. Like I was like,
That
whoa.
photo was scary, and the footage is kind of scary because my mood is really weird. I'm laughing, I'm crying, I'm talking myself down. My balance was real shaky. I remember riding and like kind of bobbling on super easy things and just, but then third person being like, okay, take it easy, don't fall again, you're fine. Then I started to get the chills about 20, 30 minutes in. I'm like, okay, that's a sign of being in shock. And again, the clock is ticking. And I got myself out. I got myself to the trailhead. My friend was there to meet me. She was like, I told her what happened, and she was like, okay, sit down, let's take stock, put on a warm jacket, and then I had somebody there to help me, which was such a relief that like, okay, I made it to safety. And quite honestly, I felt like, okay, I got through the hardest part. I saved myself. I was pretty proud of myself for what I did. I'm gonna be okay. I honestly thought that was it. I was gonna rest for, be sore for a little bit and then get back at it. And there was even part of me that I discussed, like, should I go on the ride? Like, I actually thought about I might do the last 50 miles. And my friend talked me out of it. But I mean, that's how I thought it was fine. Like, okay, I saved myself. I'm good. Should I keep riding? Thankfully, I didn't do that. I really was pretty beat up and sore. I think if my ribs hadn't been hurt, I might have ridden on, quite honestly. But there was like this bruisey pain and that sort of thing that was speaking more loudly to me than the head injury, quite honestly. But as we know now, we're almost 3 years into this. I had no idea what was in store for me. I thought I was through the worst of it. And the immediate aftermath, and it wasn't just me who thought I was through the worst of it. We were in a mountain bike town. So my friend, we went and we met up with some friends who were there for a bike festival, all women, all avid mountain bikers. And we told them what happened, and they were just like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're okay. Yeah, you're gonna have to get a new helmet, but you'll be fine. And oh yeah, I've had that too. And nobody around me was immediately jumping into gear to saying, you need to go to the ER right now. Go right now. Here's the address. Nobody said that. Everyone was like, oh, I'm so glad you're okay. Rest up. And herein lies one of the major problems with brain injury and concussion is that publicly we don't treat it as an injury. We don't go get checked out. And no one around me advised me of that. I don't know. I know you've had the same experience with many of your friends who hit their head really hard, hard enough to abrade their face, hard enough to break a helmet. And for some reason, we don't immediately say, let's go get checked out and make sure I'm okay.
Well, there's this sort of like, do you know what day it is? Do you know who the president is? Were you unconscious? And like there's almost like we have this mental checklist. I don't even know where it comes from, and like you're like, okay, well, I know who I am and what the day it is. I'm not Batman. I guess it's
And I
okay.
did that. That is
Yeah.
exactly why I didn't go get care. It's exactly why people didn't send me immediately to get care. And it's one of the main things I really hope we shift for people is that a brain injury is an injury. If you hit something that hard at 15 miles an hour, go get checked out. If I had a huge abrasion on my shoulder from it, I immediately would have addressed that, cleaned it out. Even if myself, I would have started to do care or gone and gotten care. And because we can't see what's going on inside our skull, and if there's no blood and there's, no bruising, we think there isn't an injury. I mean, even in EMT, often there's a distracting injury, like a really bloody broken femur, and often even professional healthcare workers will hone right in on what you can see, whereas underneath it's like, oh, they have internal bleeding, they have internal stuff going on. So even professionals often can be distracted by something you can see and maybe ignore or not look first at something you can't see.
So then what did you do to take care of yourself in that immediate aftermath? Like what did that look like? Just like that first week.
I did the basics of what we've all heard of is I went home, I took a week off work, I rested, I tried to get some sleep, I took an Epsom salt bath for my ribs. I basically just kind of like, oh, I tumbled, I'm kind of beat up. I'm going to take a break. And so I tried, I tried to stay off screens. I used voice, called people on the phone instead of texting. So I did some basic stuff like that that is just sort of out there in the world. Rest, stay off screens. Um, so I physically rested and also rested my eyes and, which is kind of a known thing, I guess, for concussion. So that's what I did. And then I went straight back to, okay, I'm gonna go to work. I'm gonna get back to training. I'm going to get back to my life. And pretty quickly, it was clear I wasn't able to do either of those things. Headaches were there. I couldn't, you know, I couldn't look at screens. I felt super distracted. My sleep was massively disrupted. And I just like wasn't right. So, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks in, my coach and a person I work with were finally like, you know what, maybe you should just go to the doctor and just make sure your ribs are okay, was
Yeah.
actually what it was. Make sure you don't have anything going on. And so I went to my primary care physician, got checked out, told her the scene. They took some blood tests, checked, to make sure there wasn't blood in my urine from kidneys or that there wasn't anything like that. But quite honestly, I got no assessment for my head, zero. Was basically just given a blood test, said, oh, everything looks fine. You should be good to go. And that was all that I got. And so again, I tried to just push on and just get back to work and get back to life. And this went on for more than a year, where until I really got specialty care and got specific concussion care. And, this is part of what we're going to dive into. But I
Yeah.
did not go seek care initially. I looked on the internet a little. I talked to a few friends, including your husband who'd had a concussion. And that was kind of it. And then I just tried to push through on my
Yeah.
own.
And to be clear, because I sort of was along with you in this journey, it seems like it was sort of like a couple of steps forward and then just reverting back to rest because you would have symptoms and you would go back and just try to,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And it's been a massive roller coaster. And yeah,
yeah,
I look back at my journals and even early on, I did a race like 2 months after a 24-hour long, fat bike race in the snow in extreme conditions. And, I did it slowly, but that was kind of my first coming back to doing something big. And even then, yeah, I felt like, okay, I'm back. I'm great. I'm good. I'm back to riding. But then the week after that ride, I couldn't motivate to get out the door and go ride for an hour. I couldn't get out of bed. And so it's been a massive roller coaster from day one of thinking I'm healing, I'm fine, and then I'll have a huge trough, massive headaches, you know, depressive mood, and then I'll feel good again and I'll get back to training and I'll start to see an uprise and then I fall back again. And really I think all of that is because I was trying to manage my care by myself.
mm,
And I'm not trained for this, I'm trained to like do hardcore things, push forward, don't ask for help, like do it all yourself. And so I went into kind of that gritty athlete mode of like, I'm just going to push through this. I'm going to be fine. And I wasn't asking for help because that is not something I'm used to doing. And so it has been a massive roller coaster, especially in the first year and a quarter, because I was doing it alone. I was doing it unguided. I was
yeah.
hiding it. I was doing it by myself.
And and when you were like rest is a funny word, and we have a whole show coming up on rest. But just to sort of segue into that, what did when you were trying to rest your brain and trying to rest yourself and trying to do that stuff, like what did that look like and what did that feel like? Like, did you feel at the time that it was helping or was it adding stress to your situation. You
So
understand the question?
initially, yeah, that makes sense. Initially in the first week where I did rest, it was kind of like after you've done a big race or something, you the next week you kind of don't do anything, you know? And so I was like, that's no big deal. I'm just resting. Then when it sort of, months, after 2 weeks up to 2, 3, 4, 5 months, then it was like I wanted to get moving. I knew I should get moving, but I couldn't get moving. And why am I not doing this? And I'd have dribs and drabs. And even my coach was afraid to push me too hard. And I was afraid because I'm like, if I get my heart rate up, is this going to elicit headaches? Not knowing that, it's really the other kinds of stress, emotional stress that's eliciting headaches, not physical stress that's eliciting headaches. But I didn't know that. And so I'm like, I don't know what's triggering this stuff. I'm afraid to get back to moving. I wanted to get back to moving because I love being outside. I love doing stuff. But quite honestly, it was out of fear and super lack of motivation, tons of lethargy that I was not used to. Just going out and walking my dogs for half an hour at a super low heart rate at like a shuffling pace, that was about all I could muster a lot of the times. Not because I didn't want to, just because that was the energy level that I had and the motivation or lack of motivation that I had. And the longer that went on, the more it spiraled and the more the depression came in, the more anxiety came in, the more I was like, what is happening to me? Who is this person? Like, I don't know what to do. And that was where about a year in, I was so desperate for help that I really did start reaching out and I did start asking for help. And I was so far down that I really did have to put up the white flag and say, I can't do this alone.
Yeah.
And that is where the help started to come. And I'm not gonna lie, I mean, I get emotional about it now because it was so hard. And it didn't need to be that way. Now that we know what I know, it didn't need to be that slow, that deep of recovery. And I sent myself further down by not doing some of the right things. And so there is a way, a better way to do it, which is what this is about, which is what we're going to talk about in these episodes. And it's why I'm so excited that I made it through this journey. A little messy, a little bumpy, but I made it through. So the point is, we can use my story to and your expertise and expertise of some amazing people to help other people recover faster.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know it's not easy, but we are definitely going to, you are not alone, and anyone listening to this is not alone.
I consider my nutrition and lifestyle healthy and sound, but many of us, me included, still don't get all of the essentials for optimized health from diet alone. I've always dabbled in supplements, but recovering from a brain injury with years of ongoing symptoms really forced me to hone in more precisely on what my brain and body needed to heal in the short term and also to thrive for the rest of my life. Creatine, omega-3, and vitamin D are three nutrients that expert research shows to be helpful for cognitive recovery and foundational for long-term health. Creatine is integral for energy production in cells, including those in your brain and muscle. Omega-3s are critical in impacting inflammation, muscle recovery, and brain health and function. And higher concentrations of vitamin D improve muscle strength and power, sleep quality, mood regulation, and support the immune system. These three supplements are now pillars of my daily routine. But look, not all supplements are created equally. Momentous is a company determined to bring trust and transparency to the supplement space. All of their formulas are designed with human performance experts and are NSF and Informed Sports certified for use by professional and collegiate athletes. They call this the Momentous Standard, and it's become synonymous with the industry's gold standard in quality and efficacy. So if you're like me and you want to support your brain and body with supplements made and used by the best, go to livemomentous.com and use the code BRAINSTORM for 20% off all of my favorite products. That's livemomentous.com with the code BRAINSTORM.
For years, traditional wisdom was that if you got a concussion, you should rest and let your brain heal. And as you heard in our conversation, that was the one thing Rebecca took very seriously. And as an always on the move professional athlete, was by far the most difficult and stressful. And it turns out, not the best advice. I sat down with Christopher Vaughn, who is a doctor of psychology and clinical psychology and fellow and treasurer of the Sports Neuropsychology Society, who presented on rest and the treatment of concussion at the Society's Concussion and Brain Health Symposium earlier this year. We talked about the history of rest-based treatment and what we know now, which is that exercise started relatively early, like within 48 hours, can be part of the healing process. Here's our conversation about that, like about rest and how did it become canon here for concussion care?
That's a great question, and I mean I can speak from my knowledge and experience, basically starting in the field in around 2007, and at that point, I mean I think we were working very hard to increase awareness and understanding about risks of brain injury and really risks of concussion in particular, and in the late 1900s, early 2000s. There was a real growing concern about what happened if somebody hit their head, without needing to be hospitalized, but still having significant symptoms and effects on their functioning. And particularly in youth, where I tend to do most of my work with kids, um, what was happening when kids would hit their head again before they had recovered. And
Right.
and we were starting to see through animal research and certainly clinical situations and anecdotes of really the risk and the harm and the complication of re-injuring an injured brain, which wasn't new. It wasn't a new concept, but it was getting a lot of attention around that time. And so there was a big push to try to improve safety. And and that was around making sure that individuals were recognized, identified when a concussion, and I'll say milder, but they're not
Mm-hmm.
all mild, but one that didn't require immediate hospitalization occurred, and to set up a protocol and a process to really treat and assure full recovery before people went back. And as part of that process, it was largely built around exercise and getting somebody active so that they could test and see if their injury seemed to be recovered. I mean, sort of return to play protocol process was really scripted so that we have somebody do a light jog and then a more intense jog and a very intense workout and see how they felt, and if they were able to do all that and seemed to have no symptoms, and they were able to do other activities in their normal life and seemed to have no symptoms, um, would feel that they were recovered and it was safe to go back. Um, the problem was we really didn't have a good description of what they should be doing before they were testing this out. And
Right.
so, prior to engaging in this return to play process, we needed to say, do something. And so, what became sort of a four-letter word in concussion care, rest was put in place. And I really, from talking to people that were writing the papers at that time and from research and things that I've done, it really just seemed to be a placeholder. It was just a filler. It wasn't meant to be the prescription for how you
Interesting.
treat the injury. It was just, we're worried about them going back too soon, so we're going to develop this protocol. But what do you do before that? Oh, you just have them rest. And so
Mm-hmm.
that really just kind of filled in the space. And unfortunately, it did become really what was the treatment. Except that we really didn't have any science to support that it was going to help. And in fact, if anything, I mean, there were a few studies, two or three that I could track down, that really suggested that actually rest wasn't helping, or at least more directly, restriction of activities and
Mm-hmm.
limiting, somebody doing particularly pleasurable normal activities like seeing friends or taking care of things they needed to take care of around their house. So it it I think by 2008 uh, got a little bit out of hand, just in terms of how strongly we kind of started to identify that that was the treatment recommendation.
That's so interesting because I hear a couple of things coming out of that. Like the desire to prevent somebody from having another head injury so soon before they're healed is obviously a very, very good idea, but that doesn't that's a very different thing. Like if I am a mountain biker and I've gotten a concussion from mountain biking, I can understand you being like, maybe not yet, like don't do that thing you just did. But that doesn't mean I can't spin around the park, but like when that's yeah, that's
Well,
interesting.
and the other side to it, which I have to admit, I mean, as again, I was coming out of training around that time, became involved in is that we were really trying to help kids and their functioning in school. And one of the things that's apparent, and I think most people who have had a concussion can recognize and agree to this, is that you don't feel well, and
Hmm.
when you do a lot of activities, you feel worse.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of things that give you headaches or make those headaches worse or
Hmm.
just tire you out easily. So, there's this recognized increase, exertion, effect that symptoms would go up when you did too much. So, particularly with kids in school, we said, well, let's try to limit these activities. Let's try to slow down the number of experiences they have in the day that give them a headache, which again,
Right.
also I still think has value, but it made a lot of sense just to avoid, if that hurts, don't do it. If that hurts,
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
do it. Um,
No, that does. And also, I mean, and I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I
no, no, no.
also thought I remembered you saying that there was also an idea that maybe there was some potentially deleterious effects on, putting energy demands on a compromised brain. Like, was that a part of the school of thought too, as far as like did people think it would actually delay healing, or it didn't go that far? It was just
No,
like, oh,
it,
it's
it
not good because
definitely
you're getting headaches.
it definitely did. I mean, there was the approach of, trying to manage or limit symptoms getting worse by not doing activities. And that didn't necessarily get labeled as rest, but conceptually it kind of fell in line with that. And then there was very much a theoretical model, and in early 2000s, researchers at UCLA in particular had developed a very nice model of what happens to the brain after a concussion. Particularly an injury where you don't see anything on a CT scan. You really have a hard time seeing anything on an MRI. We don't think of it as a structural injury where there's something you can say, oh, here's where here's what's
Yeah.
broken, here's the problem. It's much more of this sort of software rather than hardware injury. And so they were able to really characterize that as this, after the force that goes through the brain, that the neurons, the brain cells, have this kind of energy crisis. They're not
Hmm.
getting glucose as effectively and other nutrients, and whether that was protective or just the response, we don't know. But that change in kind of energy supply was evident in a lot of different animal research models. And then when you do things with your brain that require energy, you're sort of increasing this mismatch. You've got this, sort of like we've talked about kind of a cell phone battery that's not holding the charge. It just you suddenly get the red light, you get the headache much more, faster. And so the idea was that, well, if you're doing a lot of things with your brain, you're creating more of this mismatch. So, you know, don't do all of this reading or schoolwork or regular work. Don't do all of these activities and rest. And so that
Yeah.
was kind of the conceptual model behind it. But again, no science, no data that was correct, but a theoretical basis for it. And that was what was used in 2010, 2012 to kind of support the idea that, yeah, yes, we're keeping people from making their symptoms worse by doing too much, and we're potentially not over stressing this already compromised sort of brain system.
Very simplistic question, but how does
It's,
the brain heal? Like when I fall and I break my ribs, collarbone, you name it, I've broken them. They tell me like get on your stationary bike, get moving, get blood flowing. That is going to facilitate the healing. Does the brain not work that same way? Can I not take a bunch of sugar and like get on my trainer and shoot some sugar through that area and hope it heals?
feel free to give it a try. Let me know how it works out.
Okay.
Um, I don't know that we really know how the brain heals. And I
Okay.
think it's such a good question. I mean, simplistic, yes, but if we really understood that, then I think we could do a better job of helping it heal faster. I mean, one thing that is is very true for any injury, is the body wants to get back to normal balance. It wants to get back to normal function. Bones. I mean, I'm a neuropsychologist. I don't know how bones grow back together again.
It's
They
crazy.
do,
They do.
but I don't know how that happens. Cuts and scrapes. I mean, the brain wants to get back into that balance, and so there's clearly an internal process that does that. And we know that sort of after that initial trauma and the response, that there's just a whole bunch of brain chemicals that are out of concentration, and the brain is working to get things back into balance and restore that energy supply.
Mm,
Um, what the best way to do that is, we're not sure. And frankly, it's probably a combination of things. I mean, there's been some, sure we'll get to more of the treatment, but
hmm
there's been a lot of really interesting work on the benefits of exercise after concussion. And, one of the reasons, there are probably many, but one of the reasons that we think that exercise is helpful is because of this chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor,
hmm
BDNF.
Yep. Like
And
miracle grow for the brain.
yeah,
I've heard it described that way.
yeah, yeah. And that's produced when somebody does aerobic exercise, And so being able to initiate a internal process that helps with recovery and healing like that through exercise, seems to be one mechanism. But I think it's like anything related to the brain, it's going to be complicated, and it's probably, both doing the things that help the system heal as fast as it is able, and at the same time trying to take away the things that are potentially going to slow that down and complicate that, and we're certainly trying to understand both sides of that coin.
So let's go up to date, like 2023 consensus statement is, early diagnosis and appropriate management
Yeah.
of mild brain injury is critical to preventing poor outcomes and minimizing healthcare burden. And maybe this is another kind of unknown. What's happening in those early days? Like, why is that very early intervention so important here for identifying and starting some sort of treatment course?
I mean, the early identification is very important because of the risk of re-injury. I mean,
Okay,
that is the concern. The somebody who gets a
gotcha.
hit, feels dazed, is off balance, says they're fine, and keeps going. Those that injury on top of injury
Gotcha.
really doesn't look good, and really does take longer. So the early treatment is frankly the don't keep playing if you're still, or don't keep hitting your head,
Okay.
directly.
Because I read it more like the close, sort of like the autism research, like the earlier you get in there, the better your outcome. I was sort of reading that from my naive eye like that, like, oh, you better start whatever this protocol is that we're supposed to be doing. I saw a lot of people doing eye exercises and all that kinds of stuff during that symposium. I thought it was referring to
Yeah.
getting that kind of care quicker, not just avoiding hitting your head again.
Um, Not yet that we know of. I mean, the timing for when to implement
Yeah,
certain treatments is very unclear. Even the CDC guidance, the consensus statement from Amsterdam, very much tries to differentiate this 24 to 48-hour window. Um, and there probably is some biological difference in that. the the receptors that respond to brain-derived neurotrophic factor are not as available during that time period. I mean, there's some very acute day or two long period where things are different, and whether the brain would respond to eye exercises or even aerobic exercise at that time, we don't know, but it seems like probably not, that's probably not the window. How soon after that? Uh, you know, and of course, this is all generalized. I mean, for any
Oh
one
yeah, for
person
sure.
and one injury, your brain might be very receptive to getting some exercise 8 hours later or the next day. Um, I'll never forget a patient that I had who was a marathon runner, and the day after his concussion, went running for 12 miles.
And they thought nothing of it. But like
Thought nothing
that's
of it.
that's a Tuesday.
Yeah, and it wasn't strenuous, and it didn't bother him. Yeah. Whether it helped his recovery or hurt his recovery, I have no idea. But at least it wasn't a stressful or a difficult for him. So this it's so
Well, you
hard
yeah, you
to,
bring up that really great point in speaking of that, I was going to ask about that. Like one of the points that you brought up that I thought was really excellent is what is rest? What is relaxation? What do those things mean? Because to that guy, making him sit in the basement is incredibly stressful.
yeah, 100%, 100%. And that's where and hopefully this is one of the messages that gets pushed out is treatment really needs to be individualized. We really can't, there's not a one size fits all for a number of reasons, but again, the brain is so complicated to begin with. The injuries are so diverse, probably based on, maybe location, but how hard or, hormonal changes. There's so many factors that probably influence how the injury shows up, that trying to figure out one treatment for everybody is really not going to work. And there's been a lot of work that I know you'll probably talk about in another podcast, looking to try to differentiate just different groups of people with concussions based on their symptoms
Yeah.
and applying different treatments, which makes perfect sense. And again, I think it's both applying a treatment that helps improve the recovery and taking away the factors that are going to slow down the recovery, which for a lot of people are stress and anxiety and sleep problems, or
Hmm.
just all of those things that are general taxes on our body, that certainly after a brain injury you don't want to have a lot of. But again, that's where just telling somebody to rest doesn't mean the same thing for different people. Some people could hang out in the basement for 3 days and be happier than, or some people need to be out running 12 miles because that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Do
Um,
we know what contributes to that, like, to people who do end up with persistent post-concussive symptoms? Do we understand that?
no, we are currently part of a research group looking at that exact question for kids. We're entering in year 3 of a 5-year study. And I will tell you that the net that we have cast in terms of trying to pick up what it might be is very, very wide. There's brain imaging looking at different types of largely functional changes in the brain, of how white matter is connecting one part of the brain to the next. Um, there's a number of different blood biomarkers looking at different levels of either inflammation or hormonal or just other markers of injury to try to capture severity. We're certainly looking at stress and what kind of experiences people are having just in their daily lives that may contribute to or help with the recovery. Um, Again, symptom types of symptoms that some people have real problems with dizziness and balance, and other people just are very tired and can't concentrate. So maybe different groups or different types of experiences. It's um, it's a broad range, and I'll be very interested to see what we uncover in the next few years on that. But again, I don't think it's going to be a simple answer, and it's not going to be one size fits all for sure.
Which leads me to yet another very armchair uh, neuroscientist question here coming from me. But um, as you were talking, and as I was thinking about Rebecca's story, and how she like it was very stressful to force herself to rest,
Sure.
and thinking about my daughter was born with sort of like whatever they call it now on the spectrum, but you
Mhm.
know her pediatric neuroscientist sort of explained to us that the brain, how plastic the brain is and how it develops pathways, like well-worn cross-country ski paths and all that. And we had to do all these different things. So she didn't just entrench in certain patterns, and it was successful and it worked. Which makes me think like when the brain is in this state and you put me in a dark place without screens, wouldn't the brain train to that? Or am I being naive? Do you know what I'm saying? Like that wouldn't that make it harder for me to come out of the cave and be like, "Hey, life." And the brain's like, "No, we don't like this anymore." I mean, this is just me, I don't know.
No, absolutely. I think it's a really strong logic that I think we didn't think through very well. I mean, I should be fair and say that the vast majority of providers and practitioners working with people with concussion, when we were talking about rest, we weren't usually talking about just being in a dark room. I mean,
Yeah,
it definitely went to that extreme. I mean, there were people that would talk about cocoon therapy and
I've heard it. Yeah.
understand, yeah, and understandably, there'd be parents or providers who would say, "Well, okay, if a little rest is what you're supposed to do, but it's not working, then let's do a lot more. And yes, turn out the lights and try not to think about anything." I remember one group who had instructed a kid that I saw months after the injury, but early on they told him, "Don't talk to anybody.
Oh boy.
Don't
Oh.
like somehow
Oh boy.
the words coming out of their mouth was going to be worse than the words going around in their head. It's the same process. So point is it did get to that extreme, but really with this more active and direct, symptom focused treatment approach, I mean, you're absolutely right. If you're having trouble with light sensitivity, all of us are going to accommodate and get used to light the more we're exposed to it.
Yeah.
An intolerance with getting your heart rate up for aerobic exercise is treated by exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
You know,
that
I
makes
mean,
sense.
you want to balance the pain and discomfort somebody might be in by doing it and not go to an extreme just for their own symptom levels. But
Like any physical therapy.
yeah,
Though
yeah,
correct, right? Like physical therapy is miserable. I mean, if you've ever like dislocated your arm, let's say, and they have you
right,
walking, like it hurts, but it hurts in a
right,
good way, right? It's
right.
sort of the same idea.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I mean that we weren't there for a while because just the sense of, okay, well then we're overstraining, we're
Yeah.
overusing, this injury. And I think we just needed time to figure out that no, actually those types of therapies are beneficial,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there are more that we haven't understood or thought of or come up with, but
In general, from the symposium in your presentation, and as we're talking, is that the concussions are something that is a treatable thing. It's not we can actively do things to help ourselves get better. So, like, what if I go out tomorrow and go over my handlebars and crack my helmet and think I have a concussion? What should I know?
you're going to get better. I mean, no,
Thank you.
sure. And I think you could truly say that about probably any injury. I mean, there's going to be the trauma of it. There's going to be the difficulty of the experience and the symptoms. But I think it's fair and honest to say that our bodies are going to work to fix this. So that general knowledge and frankly optimism is really important. And one of the things that unfortunately I think has complicated the concussion world these days is some of the genuine concern about just long-term or permanent damage. And I think that takes away from the recognition that the vast majority of people are going to get better. And even somebody who might have some long-term problems from too many brain injuries is still going to get better, but there may be some downstream issues to worry about. So, understanding the positive optimism and possibilities of getting back to normal life are really important. I
Who
would
should
I
I
would
see for my care? Like, how should I make sure that I get, what I mean? Like, because, going back to the start of our conversation, a lot of people be like, oh, I should rest. And then hearing this, they're like, oh, I don't necessarily need to rest, but like, where do they point themselves to know what to do?
This is where it gets to the point that you made right before the other question of, concussions are treatable, and that is definitely a mantra that we're putting forward and I believe in. But I think it also still is a little bit maybe not as precise as it should be,
Okay.
in that our bodies treat concussions. I mean, our
Right.
again, until we get a drug, until we're taking that, massive dose of sugar pill, our bodies are treating it. Now, maybe we're adding some brain-derived neurotrophic factor to that by getting exercise, but our bodies are treating it. What is absolutely treatable is pretty much every single, in fact, not pretty much, every single symptom that could result from a concussion has a treatment. I mean, we can treat headaches, we can
Hmm.
treat concentration problems, we can treat mood symptoms, we can treat light sensitivity and balance problems. We can treat all of these things. And, whether it's because of the concussion or whether it's because of having mistakenly spent a month in a dark room and now you can't tolerate any light, the reality is whatever those symptoms are, we have ways to help them. And so, when it comes to who should I see, you know, it's going to vary ultimately based on what the symptoms are. I mean, there are a
Hmm.
lot of general providers, and as a psychologist, I'm just going to be giving education and behavioral strategies. But there are plenty of times where somebody needs to see a physical therapist because they're just not able to deal with this dizziness and movement. But we can treat that symptom.
Right. Right.
Uh, you know, Same with headaches, and there's plenty of medications or just behavioral lifestyle things that can make a big difference in headache experience. And so, yes, we want to treat the injury, but our body's sort of doing that. We're just trying to help, that happen as quickly as possible. And again, getting rid of the things that would slow that down, but then also finding paths for treatment for the actual symptoms themselves, which
Excellent.
we
Excellent.
which we have plenty of.
If you looked into your crystal ball, where do you think we are in 5 years, even with our understanding?
The precision is going to improve, and I think it's not to may it sound like I'm seeing into the future with what I just said, but I think we really are going to do a better job of focusing on more symptom specific treatments,
Hmm.
and hopefully trying to get away from too much general, whether it's rest or whether it's you got to go exercise. I mean, I've had plenty of patients who don't like exercise.
Yeah.
And while it's healthy for them, and in lab rats, it seems to help, I'm going to guess that some people aren't going to respond to exercise
Right.
that way. So, we may be swinging the pendulum back a little bit to not try to force everybody into exercise,
Right.
but
Right.
but we'll find out, for that individual, what's your happy place? What's your source of relaxation? What makes you smile? What takes away the stress in your life? How do
Yeah.
we get your brain in the best state for you to do its healing? And and again, that's going to be very different depending on who that person is. So I think and based on what their symptoms are. So I think we'll just get a lot more, hopefully, precise and refined in how we're treating injuries.
Hey, it's Celine breaking in here to say that if you're feeling a little freaked out over all of this, you are not alone. The more I learned about women like Rebecca suffering from these kinds of post-concussive symptoms, the more concerned I got as well. After all, I have hit the ground and my head my fair share of times while out mountain biking and snowboarding, so I pulled what we learned into a simple guide that explains what concussion is, how to know if you have one, and what to do if you do. It's called The Active Woman's Guide to Concussion, and you can download it for free through Feisty Women's Performance. I will put a clickable link in the show notes in each and every episode to make it easy to find and access. Thanks for listening. Stay feisty and stay safe. Okay, Rebecca, welcome back. So we just heard from Christopher Vaughn on like kind of how we got to this point where people think you just rest, right? And that sort of took on a life of its own. I'm very curious to think and hear what your impressions were on that.
There was so much, Celine. I wish I'd talked to Chris, a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, but what an amazing progression of really reinforcing that movement is medicine. And I've known this all my life. I've been an athlete my whole life, and I really haven't stopped moving since I was a child.
Yeah,
And and it wasn't really until I was forced to halt and stop with this concussion that I really saw the massive detrimental effects, the massive spiral down of what happened when I stopped moving. And it was so refreshing to hear from him that we have basically the most important tool in our own toolbox to heal ourselves. And he talked about how the brain wants to heal itself, the body wants to heal itself. And I'm realizing I got in the way of that. And I did all the wrong things. Not all the wrong things, but out of fear and lack of guidance from a professional, I stopped moving. And it was a huge spiral. And the symptoms were depression and, joint pain and moodiness and anger and temper and like all, headaches and all these physical and emotional symptoms that I exacerbated because I was afraid to
yeah.
move.
Yeah,
And
and yeah, you're not alone, obviously that. And I think that that's where getting informed care really matters, right? Like somebody who can say, it's kind of like we talked about physical therapy, kind of sucks. When you have an injury and someone's like, okay, out of bed, and you're like, oh, I don't like this. I think that you need someone to help you with concussion in kind of the same way, who's an informed person that can be like, movement might look different for you as an athlete, but you need to move because it's too stressful for you not to move.
yeah, and I love that you said that about physical therapy with an injury. It does hurt to get back. And that's where I was a little bit of afraid of eliciting symptoms, which I was, and getting severe headaches. And like literally, I was afraid I was gonna hurt my brain. And it wasn't
Yeah,
until finally a year in, finally got an MRI. I went to a specialist that works in concussions with athletes. And once I sort of got that clean bill of structural health for my brain and the explanation of like, you're structurally sound and go ahead and start moving. And Dr. Kutcher actually told my coach, Tim, he's like, you need to push on her more. You need to like kick her butt a little bit and get her moving. And once I heard that I wasn't going to hurt myself and had kind of been checked out with an MRI, then I did feel like, okay, I can start doing this. So it's so critical, I think, to get first and early the MRI, even if they tell you, you don't have a baseline, you don't have whatever. Because that was really critical for me to know that structurally I was good to go and that I could start some of these modalities with really movement being the absolute the number one thing to start doing. I love that you and Chris talked about how everyone has kind of an exercise baseline. You talked about the guy who went out and ran 10 miles, and that was normal for him. That was actually like a small day for him. And I think that's where I really struggled. And there was another turning point where, my friend Juliet and Kelly Starrett wrote a book, Built to Move, that came out in the middle of my concussion recovery. And it's basically just how to put like daily movement into your life, even if you're not going and doing a hardcore workout, you're gardening and you're walking around and, walking my dogs probably really saved me because I had to walk them.
right.
Um, and that really was sort of the okay for me to like, hey, I don't have to go ride a 100 miler. I can do 10 push-ups today and walk the dog and get in X many steps and work on my mobility and do some yoga. Like I had to give myself some forgiveness that my movement at a different level, but I still had to move.
Right.
And a tactic that I use is I actually started hiking and running and doing something that wasn't my sport that I compete in because I had a lot of baggage around, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing more. My power numbers are lame. And that actually created emotional stress for me.
Right.
And Chris also really talked about, I love how it wasn't really rest, but reframing it as relaxation and downregulation of the nervous system.
Mm.
And I can see now where cognitively, like my nervous system was freaking out of trying to find the therapies, feeling bad about myself, having all these, things that I didn't recognize. I think I wrote in my journal, I didn't even recognize myself. And so there was this high level of stress and nervous system
Yeah.
non-relaxation. But going outside and actually, quote unquote, stressing physically actually does help you down regulate because I know from Coach Tim and from Chris is like movement is going to help your body develop the resilience. You get blood flow, you get brain flow, you get cortisol, you get all these chemical releases and all these things that basically I just shut the faucet off.
Yeah.
And then when you come back from a quote unquote stressful situation of physical exercise, your body actually builds a resilience to be stronger the rest of the time. So I had the equation flipped. I was highly stressed and highly activated, you know, emotionally and not activated physically. And so, you know, and advice to people, who are going through this, or if you have friends or loved ones or whatever, is to flip that switch, down regulate the rest of your life
Yeah.
and up regulate your movement. And that's a better pathway to recovery.
Yeah, and I think going into the next episode that we have on deck, he also talked, he left us with a hopeful message that there is still a lot we don't know. I mean, we do know that getting people moving and exercise is better recovery, and we've learned a lot, but um the brain wants to heal and you can treat the symptoms. And people are now, experts are now looking at concussions through that lens of sort of putting them in buckets of different kinds of symptoms of what you have. And I thought that was a really hopeful message that he left us with there.
Yes, and I love that because yeah, research is like it's changing all the time. Just Chris was saying, the research used to be rest, and now there's been this whole progression of towards movement as a therapy. But all along through my recovery, whoever I saw, they're like, "Oh, every concussion's different. We don't know. There's a lot we don't know about the brain. We don't know." And they were hesitant to actually prescribe anything because there
Mm.
is a lot of unknown. But what I love that Chris said that was so hopeful is okay, there's like six categories of concussion symptoms, vestibular, ocular, and all the rest of them. And you can treat the symptom. And I was just like, of course. Oh my gosh. Like you don't have to have Einstein's answer to the whole equation, but you can treat the symptom. And it took a while, but that's what Dr. Ida started doing with me and some other therapies that we'll talk about in the next episode is finally it was like, okay, let's just break down. You're having this symptom, we can work on that. You're having this symptom, we can work on that. But the blanket overall hopefulness is that movement has to be part of it. You have to move your body to heal your brain. And so I was hopeful in, he was the first person I'd heard just be like, oh, well, we don't know. What are we going to do? Everybody's different. And yes, everybody's different, but so is everybody's knee injury different. So is everybody's, hip injury different, but you treat the symptoms as with any PT, like you said, you treat the symptoms of a brain injury just as you would treat any injury. And as with any injury, knee, brain, whatever, movement has to be part of your therapeutic prescription towards healing.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap this one up, and we'll talk about those symptoms and their treatment in the next episode.
Thanks, Celine. Can't wait.
Well, that's our show. You can find a full set of resources in the show notes, including a synopsis of what to do if you hit your head. But the number one there, see a medical professional who is concussion educated. Okay, join us next week when we talk about the myriad treatments Rebecca tried as she got increasingly desperate to feel like herself, and how leading experts are practicing symptom-based concussion care today. Come on back next week.